Good morning, Christy. We are grateful to have you, though we wish we were starting with better news. Eastern Europe is on the brink of war, and the world is on edge as the crisis in Ukraine intensifies, with Russia tightening its hold on that country's border. President Biden meets with his National Security Council this morning. The United States reiterating its support for Ukraine, warning of swift and severe consequences if Russia launches an invasion. Just moments ago, Vice President Kamala Harris talked about the gravity of the situation. Listen to this.
We're talking about the potential for war in Europe. I mean, let's really take a moment to understand the significance of what we're talking about. It's been over 70 years. And through those 70 years, as I mentioned yesterday, there has been peace and security. We are talking about the real possibility of war in Europe.
Ukrainian President Zelensky says his country's preparing for whatever comes, and he says he's grateful for U.S. support, but he is calling for proposed sanctions against Russia to be made public now, because he says they would be less effective after an invasion. Now, Jasmine, always good to see you this morning. Hey, we know that President Biden is meeting with his National Security Council this morning. We heard some very strong words there from Vice President Harris. What can you tell us about potential decisions that might be being made behind closed doors this morning?
Well, that's right, Chrissy. There is going to be a closed-door meeting with the president today in the Situation Room, an official tells us. And an official told me that he has, all throughout this weekend, been regularly updated about this ongoing situation, the high tensions over there in Ukraine. And that's been happening as he spent his weekend here in D.C., ditching plans to go somewhere else, instead staying to the bone here, really trying to watch what's happening, keeping in touch with those national security officials. And now, just yesterday, he received an update. The White House told us, getting updated on the vice president's trip while she spends in Munich, as she's been meeting with several different world leaders. And of course, we just heard from the vice president talking about what's at stake here if the world, if Ukraine, if Russia does invade Ukraine. And she also spoke largely about her trip, saying that it was a productive one where she was able to reinforce the U.S.'s commitment to NATO, to Ukraine, and its sovereignty. And of course, she reiterated that major shift from President Biden when he said on Friday that he was convinced that President Putin has decided to invade Ukraine. And of course, we know for weeks that President Biden hadn't gone that far. He said that they were not able to make that decision yet. But of course, officials tell us that new updates in U.S. intel has allowed the president really to come to that decision. So I expect that we will hear more from the White House as the morning goes on after they convene that very serious meeting here at the White House. One of the reasons why he stayed this weekend, to keep on top of things as the day goes on. Boris, Christy.
We know you'll keep us updated with the latest developments. Jasmine Wright reporting from the White House. Thank you so much. Let's go now to CNN's Michael Holmes. He joins us from Lviv, Ukraine. Michael, obviously the situation there extremely uncertain. The Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky saying yesterday that Ukrainians would not panic. How are people there preparing where you are?
Yeah, I've been here for over a week now, Boris, and it's been really interesting and a little humbling in a way to meet ordinary Ukrainians and see how they're dealing with this. I mean, they hear the US and others pretty much every day say it's happening. I mean, the Russians are coming, it's imminent. Put yourself in their position. Imagine how they feel. But it's remarkable, too, how stoic everyone is. They're getting on with daily life, but fully aware, too, that life could be upended any day. You know, they're concerned, but they're not panicking at all. They are preparing. I spoke to the mayor of this city, a beautiful historic city in the west of Ukraine, and I asked him if Russia's leaders, if they were listening to him, what he would tell them. Here's what he said.
If they attack us, then they will suffer from big losses in both military personnel and equipment. This is our free land, and we will never give it to anyone.
Never give up.
Yeah, so you see there the defiance in the face of a formidable foe. They are unafraid, Boris.
So I want to ask you, Michael, Christy here, do you get the feeling that this is an if this is not an if, but a when situation right now for the Ukrainians, that they expect this attack from Russia? And if so, how capable is the Ukrainian army?
That's a fair question. I mean, certainly the imminency of it is the view of the US and other Western nations, that as we've heard. Ukrainian leaders, they're a little bit more optimistic, although, as they say, we're prepared for anything. In terms of the capability of the Ukrainian military, it is interesting. They have come a long way. I was actually talking to CNN military analyst Lieutenant General Mark Hertling earlier in the day, and he said that he was with the Ukrainians in Iraq in 2004 and was in command of units of theirs, and he said they were underwhelming. They were not good in the field. However, since then, a lot has changed. They are better trained, far better trained. They are better equipped, far better equipped. And importantly, they're better led. You've got to admit, though, that it's going to be the Ukrainian military versus the Russian military. It is not going to be a fair fight in that sense. But I think what you will see, and I spent a lot of time in Iraq with Mark Hertling, I think what you will see as it goes on, if it happens, is it will become an insurgency. It won't be sort of, main force versus main force. It would quickly become a hit and run thing for the Ukrainians, and they've been training for that. And you'll see something like we saw in Iraq, what we saw in Afghanistan when the Soviets were in there and the Mujahideen. It'll become an insurgency, and that is never pretty, but they are capable. They say they are ready, and of course we all hope it doesn't come to that.
Michael Holmes, great information and great job over there. Thank you so much, Michael. Take good care. Want to get some insight from CNN correspondent Natasha Bertrand and CNN political and national security analyst David Sanger. Thank you both so much for being with us. We certainly appreciate it. Natasha, I want to ask you about the White House, because they contend that they're committed to diplomacy, as we heard there from the vice president this morning, that there is always time to talk. We also heard from Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin, though, yesterday asserting that Russia is, quote, moving into the right positions to conduct an attack. This does seem, as Michael Holmes characterized it, as imminent. Does anyone truly believe in this administration that an invasion is not going to happen?
Well, they certainly seem to think that it is more likely than not that it is going to happen. And Vice President Kamala Harris did tell reporters earlier this morning that she believes the diplomatic path here is narrowing considerably. She actually reiterated to me when I asked whether the U.S. still believes that Russia has actually given that order to invade Ukraine, that she reiterated that this is something that the U.S. believes Putin has actually made his decision on. Take a listen.
As the president has said, we believe that Putin has made his decision. Period. And but I will also say that as part of our relationship and partnership, and in the context of the alliance, we do share information, certainly, because we want to make sure that we are all working with the same information when we make these very critical and meaningful decisions.
So I also asked her whether she believes that the U.S. and Ukraine are actually on the same page about this intelligence, because as we know, Ukraine has been expressing skepticism over the last several weeks and months that Putin is actually about to order an invasion of their country. And Zelensky has accused the West of kind of overhyping this, suggesting that they are causing panic inside of his country, and that saying every day that a war is imminent is not necessarily helpful for the country. And Kamala Harris would not directly respond to that question. She said that there is intensive intelligence sharing going on between the U.S. and Ukraine, and she is confident that the U.S. and allies have been sharing intelligence and information as well in order to all get on the same page about the severity of the threat. She also addressed the sanctions question. We saw yesterday that Volodymyr Zelensky said, why are we not having sanctions issued right now on Russia, knowing that they are potentially about to launch this invasion? Harris said that the U.S. and allies still believe that these sanctions are going to have a deterrent effect, even if they are imposed after Russia orders that attack.
So, David, expound on that for us, would you? That is one of the biggest questions that I've heard a lot of people posing, is why would we, the U.S. and others, not impose sanctions on them now before there is an invasion? As President Zelensky said, after the invasion, it would really be a watered-down version. What is the reality of implementing sanctions prior to an invasion?
Well, it's a really good question, and the answer is thinking this out 2 or 3 chessboard moves ahead. If you do the sanctions now, Putin could come to 2 conclusions. First, he could say that's a provocation. He said, we haven't gone over anybody's borders, we haven't done anything yet. All you're really looking for is an excuse to sanction us. The second thing is, when they do go over the border, what is it that you do then? Because you're in the situation where you may not have the best sanctions left to go execute. So it's really a question of the credibility of sanctions. Now, you heard yesterday here in Munich, President Zelensky asked the entire crowd at the Munich Security Conference to go invoke sanctions now. He made the same case in a private meeting with Vice President Harris. But the thing is that the sanctions are supposed to be a deterrent to prevent an attack, and if you do them preemptively, you've lost your deterrent.
Very good point. So let me ask you this, because we heard UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson, Natasha, yesterday say that Russia's planning, quote, the biggest war in Europe since 1945. We heard similar language about war in Europe from Vice President Kamala Harris. And how we need to be cognizant of really what that means. Do you see any evidence, as we lead up to this, what the White House and this administration plans to do if this happens to avoid all-out war? Can we do so if Russia invades Ukraine?
Well, it's a really great question here, and I don't know what Natasha has to say, but my sense of it is, from talking to the people in the administration, that they will do the sanctions right away, but there's nothing they're going to do to put U.S. forces in because they don't want it to escalate out of control.
That's exactly right, and they have yet to really lay out how much they're willing to do to subvert Russia in the event that they do actually invade. Sanctions are obviously one option, and they're going to put more forces on that eastern flank of NATO in order to deter Russia from potentially making a move on NATO countries. Those eastern flank NATO countries are extremely nervous about Russia's aggression at the moment. But right now, that's really all we have been told, is that this is not going to be something that the U.S. gets entangled with, and that is actually something that Kamala Harris said today. She said, we do not consider ourselves entangled in this conflict between Russia and Ukraine, but we consider it an extremely important moment for the future of European security, and that is why we are so engaged. And so with the situation that we saw last year in Afghanistan, with this president obviously intent upon not getting American forces into another conflict, I do not think that we are going to see U.S. troops on the ground. That is something that they have said is really not on the table at this point. However, the bolstering of those NATO forces is likely something that we are going to see. Direct conflict with Russia, that could lead to a conflict that could really upend the world.
Mm-hmm. So, David, Ukrainian President Zelensky also asserts that the West has appeased Putin for years, and that led to this crisis. A lot of people would argue it's not the job of any one country to police the world by any means, but what evidence do you see to support or not that assertion from President Zelensky? And if you do agree with it, do the U.S. and other countries, do they hold, I don't know that responsibility is the right word, but do they hold some sort of engagement here in terms of when we look at the picture we're in, the position that Russia is in right now?
Well, I think it's certainly fair to say that in the 15 years between the time that the U.S. was still talking about bringing Russia into NATO, the time that the U.S. was actually encouraging Russia to enter the World Trade Organization, basically doing all the things to bring it into a European nation, the two countries have really talked past each other, right? The U.S. vision of this has been that Russia will become more and more European, and that its impulses that historically have been so troublesome to the world would be tamed by the fact that it would be treated like any other European nation. As Putin has gotten more and more confident over the years, he has moved more and more toward seeking to address his grievances. And his chief grievance is that Ukraine and other former Soviet states are integral to the Russian state, And if you believe that this is sort of his legacy move to begin to try to reconstitute parts of the Soviet Union, there is nothing about integration with Europe that I think he would find particularly appealing right now. And he would say that the Americans and the Europeans were never really interested in making Russia anything other than a very junior partner to Europe. So yes, I think you can certainly say that there are things that both sides should have and could have done differently.
David Sanger, Natasha Bertrand, we so appreciate your insight and your perspective today. Take good care and thank you so much. Well, good morning to you at 6:48 here. There is a powerful pro-Trump group pushing false claims about voter fraud and calling for new restrictions on voting in Florida.
The group is called Defend Florida, and they've yet to produce any evidence whatsoever of voter fraud. But still, some Republican lawmakers are rushing through proposed changes that could see thousands of people pushed off of voter rolls. CNN's Leila Santiago has the story.
Go to defendflorida.com.
Mike Flynn.
I'm going to be there.
Roger Stone.
Fixing 2020.
Mike Lindell. They're all promoting Defend Florida, a self-described citizens organization touting false claims about widespread election fraud.
That happened thousands and thousands of times in the 2020 election.
Caroline Weatherington, the once president of Women for Trump Florida, is a co-founder of Defend Florida. The group recently released a report that calls for the purging of voter rolls and changing Florida election laws. Even though in November of 2020, Florida's Governor Ron DeSantis said this.
We're now being looked at as the state that did it right.
Defend Florida's co-founders told reporters they found more than 5,000 instances of voter or voting irregularities in Florida, and they say they have signed affidavits to prove all of them.
The group has not provided me with any actionable data.
Marion County Supervisor of Elections Wesley Wilcox, a registered Republican, is the president of the Florida Supervisor of Elections Association, which represents supervisors in the state's 67 counties.
I take it as a slap that they're insinuating that we are not following the law.
The group is asking election officials to remove inactive voters from the registration list, voters like 78-year-old Sally Davidson.
Did you know you were on that list?
No. Heavens no.
We tracked her down to find out if she was aware Defend Florida had deemed her voter registration problematic.
They cannot take my God-given constitutional right away from me, because as the Constitution is written now, it doesn't say failure to vote.
She hasn't voted in decades, but remains active in the electoral process by signing petitions. Defend Florida also claims it discovered tens of thousands of people registered at locations that are not residential addresses. At the top of their list of examples, over 9,100 registered at the Crestview Courthouse. We reached out to Okaloosa County, where the courthouse is located. They tell us there are actually 7,670 registered voters at the courthouse. It's an address the county assigned to them because about half are active military or their family members.
They may literally be in Afghanistan, Germany. They still are eligible to vote.
The others are those without a physical address, like a voter living in a boat or an RV. This month, Florida Republicans introduced a new bill that aims to put in place many of the measures Defend Florida is pushing. It's calling for an Office of Election Crimes and Security, more voter ID requirements, adding steps to more limits on vote by mail, and requires county supervisors of elections to update voter registration lists more often.
We didn't have a totally clean election because we got really dirty voter rolls, but at least the people of Florida came out and voted.
I have yet to see something that is factual that needs to be addressed.
It is an evolving situation this morning at Ukraine's border with Russia, and we know White House officials say President Biden will meet with his National Security Council this morning in the Situation Room to discuss what's happening.
Yeah, and later today, sources say that French President Emmanuel Macron and Russian President Vladimir Putin will speak by phone as diplomatic efforts to avert an invasion continue. Amid growing fears that Russia could invade Ukraine, many living in the capital of Kyiv are now fleeing their homes, and they're moving west, away from Moscow's military buildup. One place that's become a refuge for Ukrainians is Lviv, a western city near the border with Poland, where most U.S. government officials have already been relocated.
Well, CNN's Michael Holmes went to Lviv. He spoke with one family who did just that. They left Kyiv because they wanted to stay away from what they believe is going to be some serious violence.
In an apartment in Lviv in western Ukraine, Natalia and Dmytro Kolesnik play with their 3 young children. This is where they live, but it's not their home. That's because until just a few days ago, home was the capital, Kyiv, 600 kilometers to the east, now a potential Russian target.
Kyiv is also could be attacked by missile, or maybe some Kyiv factory or Kyiv energy base.
According to American intelligence, Kyiv would be a primary target if Russia invades, and that's why the Kolesnik family decided they couldn't risk staying.
It was never in my head that this could happen, but having this experience right now, talking about the east part of Ukraine, I can think that this basically could be the situation. That's why I'm considering the fact that we are not sure and safe anyway.
Lviv is a vibrant, historic city. It's close to Poland, Slovakia. It feels very European. It's also, thanks to Russia, become a refuge for Ukrainians fleeing their homes, and not just from this crisis. They've come too from the Donbass in the east, where Russian-backed separatists have for 8 years waged war on the Ukrainian government, and from Crimea, annexed by Russia in 2014. Oksana Novikova and her family know well how the Kolesniks feel. In 2014, when the Russians came to Crimea, she knew she had to leave, and now runs this bakery in Lviv.
Many people went missing or were imprisoned when Russia occupied Crimea, she says. I didn't want to end up like them, so I left.
The notion that the massive and powerful Russian military might actually cross the border again is almost surreal for Ukrainians. But while they might be concerned, they're defiant too. Oksana says, right now I feel calm because we Ukrainians have more confidence in ourselves. We are a united country. For the Kolesnik family, they'll stay here in Lviv until this standoff, the threat of war, recedes. Then they say they'll head home to Kyiv. Michael Holmes, CNN, Lviv, Ukraine.
Michael, thank you. A group in Florida. Well, closing arguments begin tomorrow morning in the federal hate crimes trial of Ahmaud Arbery's killers. Gregory McMichael, his son Travis, and their neighbor William Bryan were convicted last year of killing Arbery as he jogged through their South Georgia neighborhood.
The prosecution called some 20 witnesses before resting its case, and notably, neither the McMichaels nor Bryan testified in their defense. In fact, the defense only called one witness. CNN's Nadia Romero reports.
Boris and Christy, throughout the trial, we heard the prosecution lay out their case, saying that this was all racially motivated. 20 witnesses took the stand to testify, one after another, who say they had personal conversations one-on-one with the defendants. The prosecution even showed text messages and social media posts with the defendants using racial slurs and saying negative things about black people as a whole. The prosecution says it's quite simple. They targeted, attacked, and killed Ahmaud Arbery because of the color of his skin. Now, all 3 defendants are already facing life in prison, but Ahmaud Arbery's mother says if they are convicted in the federal hate crimes trial, this will send a message. Take a listen.
They killed Ahmaud simply because Ahmaud was black. And what we heard over the last 2 days, these guys were racist. And these charges needed to be tried. The world needed to know what type people the McMichaels really were.
Now, the defense says that the prosecution has this all wrong. The only reason why they went after Ahmaud Arbery was because the men had known about a black man who had been going through a home that was under construction. They knew things were stolen from that home and stolen from vehicles in the neighborhood, and they believe that Ahmaud Arbery was the person responsible. They say they were trying to do a citizen's arrest, but when he resisted, they ended up killing him, but it was only in self-defense. Closing arguments are set for Monday morning. Boris, Christy.
Nadia.